Get ready to dive into the future of electric vehicle charging with the visionary CEO of Steam A. With over 14 years of experience in the energy sector, Sir is redefining the EV landscape with Iris, an all-in-one network administrator that's revolutionizing how CPOs manage their network. Imagine real-time fault detection, predictive failure management, and seamless EV roaming all at your fingertips. Iris is more than just a software. It is the solution to the everyday challenges faced by operators and drivers alike. So join us on this podcast as we explore how Iris is simplifying operations, enhancing customer experience, and paving way for a more sustainable future of transportation.
Hi. So to start off, what initially sparked your interest into the sustainability and the EV space to face? And how has this, shaped your vision for your product that Iris?
Yeah. So for me, it was a bit of a step from a neighboring elite zone anyway, right? So since 2010, I've been working on energy sector initiatives. I was part of an initial strategy group at Mahindra and Mahindra, where they were exploring some new technologies in solar power back in 2009. That was my sort of first meaningful foray into the energy sector. And then in 2010, I joined a business called Enzen Global. I was with them in the UK business. And from then until now, I've pretty much been actively engaged in the UK's energy sector. So I lived in the UK for 12 years, working in the energy sector across transmission and distribution predominantly. So I'm not new to energy as such. And if you look at folks who operate in the electric mobility or sustainable mobility space, they usually come from either energy or technology or automotive backgrounds or all three, right? So from my personal perspective, I've got both energy and technology in my background. And automotive kind of runs in the family, if you pardon the pun. My in-laws run an auto component manufacturing business, so it's something that comes up in conversations every now and then. So in many senses, I'm personally not too surprised by my entry into EVs. For me, the specific thing was once I started up on my own about 3 years back, initially I was doing a lot of consulting like I had done previously for about 11, 12 years until then. Inside me, there was this desire, this craving to do something that's hockey stick, right? So I see a lot of my friends from my MBA days were all talking about hockey stick growth and stuff like that. And because I was involved in the energy sector, in the transmission and distribution space, as I always tell people, it's recession proof because regardless of what happens in the economy, you're going to continue to use gas, power, and water, and so on. But in many senses, it's also excitement proof, right? Just because you're making more money, you're not going to drink more water or use more electricity. Probably a little bit, not so much more. So it was a stable industry to be in, but for me, growth then meant cannibalizing other people's performance. So if I had to grow as a consultant in that space, then it meant I had to steal business from others figuratively, right? Whereas when you get into a space that's new, upcoming, and if it's something that's growing quite rapidly, then that gives you an opportunity to be carried forward by the tidal waves. And that's really where I found EVs as a nice opportunity.
So you were always involved into the space, but how did the idea come about? Okay, this is the big problem that I see, and this is how I'm going to solve it.
Right. So once I decided to start up on my own, as I said, initially I continued consulting in my old world, work with energy and utility companies in the UK, solve some of their problems and so on. But in parallel, I was also talking to a number of industry experts, and I was fortunate to be part of. So I am an alumni from IIM Bangalore, and there are some groups in UK and Europe which include a lot of IIM alumni and so on. So I had the privilege of engaging with a lot of people who were in senior strategic roles in energy, in mobility, and so on. And slowly those conversations kind of helped me zone into EV charging as a specific area of interest, right? Now, obviously, they opened my eyes up to the potential that existed with electric vehicles. Usually, when I look at anything that works really well, right? So it's usually where you've got business, government, and society coming together, right? So that's really where you see any opportunities or any solution. And in this case, part of what I realized was happening was governments across the world, at least in Europe, UK, and later in US as well, were starting to come out with fairly serious directives on how to get towards net zero transition, how to make it happen, and so on. They were starting to ban petrol and diesel vehicles, the sale of petrol and diesel vehicles from 2030, 2035, and so on and so forth. There was a very clear direction from the government. And then when you look at what business has been doing, a sort of marketplace in the world of automotive technology or even automotives in general, they started, I'm talking about 2-3 years back, they were starting to announce their clear intent to stop all their R&D into petrol diesel engines and technologies, and they were starting to make their commitment in the EV space very clearly visible. I'm talking about the likes of Jaguar Land Rover, more recently even Mercedes-Benz and so on. So these are players who've been in the industry for decades. They've shaped the thinking of the industry, and if they are saying they're going to step out of petrol and diesel, then it meant business is heading that way, government is heading that way, so society has to follow. So that's kind of broadly where I came into this. I would say the main meeting push for me came when I reconnected with a former colleague of mine. We kind of reconnected with each other after about 12 years, where much of those 12 years he had spent in the Netherlands working in the EV charging space, right? And so he'd been the head of product development for a large charge point operator. He later joined a specialist niche charger OEM, and he was heading R&D for them in a couple of geographies. So he'd seen the EV charging space from both the point of view of a user as a charge point operator, as well as a maker of chargers, right? And he had his own wish list of things he thought we could solve to make the world a better place in that sense. And that kind of gave me the direction. I did look at other areas around EV charging and so on, but part of my decision making was given by the fact that battery chemistry is evolving. It continues to evolve now, about 3 years later as well, and it will continue to do so for a while. And as a poor startup founder, I didn't want to invest my time and energy into something where I wasn't sure what was going to happen later. So it felt like in the EV value chain, and we did some serious analysis of the entire value chain, and we figured the charging space we felt was slightly an easier bet for us to take. And within charging, we said, let's start with software. So in terms of investments and so on, we can still keep our hands around some tight budgets and make things happen. And that's where my discussions with this former colleague of mine, his name is Pon, by the way, Pon Paul Raj, and he is one of the leaders in Steam A today. He continues to remain in Netherlands, and he drives our product strategy. And since my first conversation in recent times, it was back in 2021, I would say, since then we started with looking at, okay, what do we solve?
Please yourself into EV charging and that.
Absolutely. That's really how it came. And we started with mapping pain points, right? So with his experience in Europe, the journey that Europe has gone through in the last 10 years, it was quite useful for me to understand Pon's perspectives on what are the problems that are happening. And the overarching message was this, right? So public EV charging remained quite unreliable, even in Europe, despite over a decade plus of experience and track record there. It still remains an opportunity for improvement, definitely exists there, right? So the quality of services people are getting there is still questionable. And that's really what we wanted to address. We looked at why is this happening, and the understanding was, well, most organizations are still in a bit of a land grabbing kind of mode. Most charge point operators are throwing all their money at putting more and more chargers out there. So it helps with their valuations and so on. But we felt there was a need to look at quality of service as well. And that's really where we said, okay, let's attack the problem of reliability. And we did a whole deep dive exercise on what are the things that are getting in the way of a reliable charging experience. So for us, I would say Tesla is like the gold/platinum standard in the industry. Right? Obviously, they have the advantage of owning the whole value chain from the vehicle to the charging infrastructure to the software to everything that lies in between. But our broad vision when we started was to say, how do we give the Tesla charging experience to non-Tesla drivers? So that's broadly the one-liner of what we are heading to. So now our product suite is really about on the one side, how do we make EV charging more reliable? And on the other side, how do we improve energy efficiency? Because again, coming from my background in the energy sector, I think chargers are really vending machines, right? It's really the commodity. It's electricity that's really what you're buying. So to have this kind of tectonic shift in the energy mix of a vehicle, it means the energy sector has to be dragged along, and that's really where it felt we should focus on energy efficiency as well. So improving EV charging reliability and improving the efficiency of energy delivery. Those are the two major points we focus on.
Okay, but how did you manage to solve these 2 points that you just mentioned about? Like, what is the solution?
Right. I wouldn't claim to say that we've managed to do both yet, but that's basically our North Star. These are the things that are driving us as we move forward, right? So when it comes to reliability as the first point we're looking at, so to help people understand the scale of the problem I'm talking about, right? So we looked at some data and some numbers from Europe across countries, and what we found was, if you look at 100 instances of public EV charging, right, 60 of them are all right. So in 60 out of 100 instances, people are able to get energy delivered to their vehicle. They're able to charge without problems. So the remaining 40, they face some problems or the other, and it kind of splits in equal halves. So 20 out of those 40 sessions, you face some problems, you address them, and then you're able to finally actually get your vehicle charged and you move on. So substandard customer experience, but you still get energy out of the transaction. But the last 20%, you are unable to charge because the vehicle either doesn't talk to the charger, there is a firmware mismatch, there are energy issues, supply demand issues, data network issues, charge of asset issues. So numerous reasons why that failure could happen. So the split of 60% happy path experience, 20% of a substandard experience, but people still end up charging their vehicles, and then 20% of absolute failure felt pretty shocking for us. When I looked at it the first time, I was shocked because I asked myself, if I drove to a petrol bunk and I was told by somebody, 6 out of 10 times you will get petrol, that seems like something you would laugh about, right? And that's where EV charging was when I started working on this, and it still has quite some distance to go from there. So that's really where our thinking started from. So with respect to reliability, what we've done now is so firstly, this whole solution for us, we conceptualized this as a digital twin for EV charging. So we looked around in the market, we looked at some of the other players who were there predominantly overseas, and later more recently we started looking at those operating in India as well. And I think a lot of the focus so far has been to build what people call a CMS, a charging management system or a charging station management system, which is fine. But for me, that's really a glorified version of an OCPP reader, right? So you have an OCPP connection to your chargers and you just show the data in some shape and form. But we started working backwards from customer pain points. We said, okay, OCPP is one tool for us, but what we're really looking to do here is solve customer problems on both reliability and energy efficiency. So the first thing we did was to find a design partner. I'm delighted to share that we managed to convince Xeon Charging, who are a pretty well-known name in the country, to actually take a punt in us, right? So it also helped that we were geographically fairly close to them. They're about an hour away from us. But more importantly, when we engaged with the founders, Xeon, particularly Karthikeyan, who's one of the co-founders, and he's the CEO of the business, and he also spent quite some time with Nalashimanta, who runs a lot of their operations. We found that we had some shared vision for the sector. So in discussions with them, they also told us that, look, CMS is done and dusted. Every week we get probably 1 or 2 calls from software makers who are building their own CMS solution. We think you guys are onto something. You've got a good team in place. You've got all that experience from Europe. So why don't you do something that takes the sector to the next level, which is broadly what we wanted to do as well, right? So that's how we started. The end point of all that brainstorming and taking customer feedback was to conceptualize this digital twin to manage EV charging. So in many senses, we are looking at this, at whatever we are building, as a suite of applications, software applications that will help a charge point operator or a fleet charging operator, basically anybody with charging infrastructure in their networks, basically help them to run their business efficiently, right? So everything they need to run the entire business is part of our suite. Now, some of the products are already built, some are work in progress, but that's really where it started. We're calling this Iris, right? So Iris is the umbrella name for the brand. So Iris is our digital twin for EV charging management and EV charging business management. And within Iris, we have a number of products in this portfolio. So the first one is Iris Network. Like everybody else, we need a CMS in place as well. So it's in many senses our foot in the door in the industry. So we didn't think people would take us seriously enough if we said we're going to do a lot with the data, but we don't even have a CMS built in house. So it didn't feel like something we should do. So we got into it, and like I said, our approach has always been to work backwards from customer pain points. So we spent quite some time out on the roads, with sitting in CPO offices, sitting in on their management meetings, looking at the kind of challenges they are facing, looking at the kind of challenges their end customers are facing, people who are driving the EVs on the road. And that's really where we work backwards from to come up with our list of requirements. So that's what we use to develop our design and develop Iris Network, our charging management system. I would use this opportunity to throw open a challenge to everybody else in the industry to say, if you find any modules in our Iris Network solution that is ordinary, in the sense that does what is seen conventionally around, I'm really keen to know that, right? And I'm not saying this from a position of being conceited about it or anything. I know fully well that we had the advantage that we are a player who came into this space slightly later than a lot of the other successful players in the market. I greatly value what they've done to the industry. To take a punt and enter an industry when it was at that early nascent stage takes a lot. So I greatly respect and value our competitors in the industry. I mean this more out of professional satisfaction and comfort to say that we feel truly re-engineered what a CMS typically does and looks like.
There's a younger and smart one out there.
Yeah, being young, so But I think it also helps that our approach is being to work backwards from customer problems rather than work forwards from OCPP, right? So we look at OCPP as one of many different sources. That's really where it started. So Iris Network is about CMS. Iris Energy is our energy management system, and that can be used for. So basically, it's really where we start taking smart charging to the next level. So you could use it for site level energy management, particularly in sites where you have multiple sources of energy, multiple loads, which includes EV charging. So our software helps and primarily drives strategic site level autonomous load balancing, right? So you balance the supply and demand of energy at site. How do you make sure to deliver this kind of load? What is the cheapest mix of all the various sources of energy you have outside? You might have some solar panels, some windmills, battery power, or battery backup, or DG sets, grid electricity, and so on. So how do you make sure you have the most optimal mix of all these sources to supply to all the demand that you have during the day? That's Iris Energy for you. We got Iris R1. It's our asset management tool, right? So when tool kind of understands it, it's basically our asset management system, which brings a lot of best practices I personally looked at from utility companies. Right? So they had decades of managing distributed assets. So some of the transformation programs I led and drove in the UK were for utility companies with anywhere from 3 to 8 million assets on their records, right? So when you have that scale of an asset base and a couple of thousand engineers running around setting things right, you've got to be really sharp in how you prioritize your work and how you manage the health of your asset base. They are bringing all of that learning and experience, and also my colleague Pon's background in the EV charging space. We are putting all of that together to see how we can bring in that kind of thinking into the EVSC value chain, right? So that's really where we're bringing that. And alongside Pon, I have a third leader in the business, a person called Nagu, who's been with us for over a year now. And so Nagu's got over 30 years of experience. So he's worked on generations of technology, right? And he still remains a hands-on technologist at heart. So for me, as a startup founder, with obviously always your resources are quite stretched at all times. So I have a pretty young team. We have built a decently sizable team of about 30 people, but a lot of them are youngsters who are looking to learn the trade. And for me to have somebody like Nagu leading the front there has been quite useful. That's how we built this. So that's Iris R1, which is about asset management, where we are bringing in solutions around predictive asset health management. How do you predict the failure of a charger before it actually
How does
happens?
that work? It's a big thing.
Yeah, so I'm not going to give away the secret sauce, but I'll give you the broad concept here. So a couple of things. One is prediction of failure before it happens. Obviously, a lot of that comes down to data and having analyzed volumes and volumes of data from the past. Right? That is one part, which is more the technical analysis part of this. But where we started with is to look at every component in a charger. Right? So we pretty much figuratively broke down an entire charger and looked at the failure modes associated with every single component in there. Now, there are some failures we can't really do anything about. There are failures we can manage and do things differently about. We've looked at a number of different charger makers, charger OEMs. We've gone through all of the specification sheets. And now, obviously, having a customer like Xeon in our midst, they have a few hundred charging points on their network. And with their kind support and experience as well, we are now able to put the theory that we come with, which is these are the best practices in asset management. This is what needs to be done in EV charging, with their practical experience to put it all together, right? And once you have all of that in place with the volume of data we have access to now, then it makes it easier for us to apply data science techniques to figure out, sort of come out with projections, come out with forecasting models, prediction models, and so on. So that's what we're doing right now. A large part of that is already ready. It's already in place, and we are seeing decent interest in the Indian market. And it's something we're quite excited about overseas markets as well, right? So when you look at things like TMS solutions or even smart charging and energy management solutions, in Europe, you do have a lot of competition. But when it comes to asset management of the kind we are looking at, where you use data and insights as well as deep domain knowledge, right? Knowing very deeply how an EV charging business runs, as well as knowing quite deeply how a charger actually is constructed and functions. We are seeing a lot of excitement in Europe as well with respect to R1, which is our asset management software. Essentially, yes, applying our knowledge and learnings in the form of data science and models that progressively are getting towards AI and ML. So that's really where it is. I know I haven't really given you a pinpointed answer, but
my next question was like you're thinking about that you're collecting a lot of data data. What are those data points, and how is it helping to the business owners who are using the product?
Right. So let me give you a conceptual response to that, right? So like I said before, we work backwards from customer pain points. So we look at what are the failures that are happening out there. Now, from an end EV driver's perspective, they would simply say, I went to this particular charge point, it didn't work. Now that it didn't work could have multiple reasons and multiple meanings. Now, in one instance, for example, with Xeon, we saw that they had a charge point, a charging station where they had two chargers, both from the same manufacturer. We had a BYD vehicle come in one day and charge perfectly fine with one of the chargers in that station. The next day, the exact same vehicle came there to charge. They plugged into the other charger in the same station and it did not work, right? So the vehicle is the same. In fact, the exact same car in itself is the same charge point operator, is the same software, same electricity board, same site, same transformer. Everything is the same. Even the chargers are from the same manufacturer, and yet it failed in one and worked in the other, right? Now we realized that was on the basis of some firmware mismatch that was in the charger. Now this way we looked at all the failures that have happened over time that we had access to and did a detailed map of how each failure is linked into various causes. That's really where we started. We analyzed all those failure modes, and then we looked at, as I said, we poured through details of all the chargers and their spec sheets, their details. How do we link various failure modes to their error codes, right? Now, sometimes the same error code can be used to understand multiple different failings in the part of the charger. So how do we map that? How do we use? Then we overlay our own industry experience and domain knowledge this to say, oh, this happens and this happens and this happens. This is the likely reason why that has happened. So we kind of work backwards from the problem to what are the likely causes. And then we turned it around on its head to say, okay, understanding all these signature patterns, right? So the next time we see something developing in a particular way, we are then able to say, okay, this particular component, these are the spec sheet, these are the standard specs associated with this component. These are the, let's say, things like mean time between failures, and we look at all the standard asset failure and failure mode analysis metrics. We apply all of that onto a developing pattern, and then we have developed our own in-house developed a score called R score, right? So basically, we named this asset management product R1 because it's a reference to the reliability coefficient, right? So if you have a reliability coefficient of 1, it means the product is 100% efficient, 100% reliable. Obviously, that's theoretical, but that's our vision and that's what we want to work towards, right? Now, we have developed what we call an R index, right? An R score. That's like evolved from this. We've looked at multiple things around probabilities of failure, the impact failure. So essentially, what is the consequence if something fails, and applied various work and asset management data that we have access to. In many cases, a lot of public information that's available as well. And then charger specific information, charger specific guidance, all the asset care plans, all the various chargers come with. We apply learnings and insights from those. So what we end up with is this really nice, neat little score called the R score, which gives us a sense of your asset base. Let's say we are particularly thinking about players like Xeon who have hundreds of chargers now and are really eager and growing into thousands of chargers in a very short span of time. Then something like this will help them prioritize their work plan. When you have, say, 5,000, 10,000 chargers in your network, and you have only a few hundred people to deploy, and these are geographically dispersed, distributed chargers along your network, how do you make sure you get the biggest bang for your buck in terms of work management, right? How do you make sure you have this long list of work to be done? You have a short list of people who can go out and do this work. How do you prioritize all this? And that's where our R score index really helps to help them prioritize which work should be done first, so they maintain a better uptime than they've done before, right? So it's all down to analyzing past data, building forecasting models, prediction models based on that, applying a lot of asset management insights, applying a lot of EV charging insights as well. So we're able to give a red, amber, green kind of alert to say, hey, this thing is really risky now. And instead of, the key thing is this, right? If you look at a charger that's gone off, let's say a charger that's failed at any point in time, it's a double whammy for the charge point operator. So on the one side, if the charger is off, you're not selling energy, right? So instantly your current revenue is down to zero. Now, if that happens too often, you leave a bad taste with the customer's mouth, which means they are probably going to avoid you the next time they can, right? And obviously in the industry, we all have a broad sense, not just in the industry, as EV drivers and part of various forums. And broadly, the moment you mention the name of a particular CPO, then EV drivers already have a view of, would I go to them, would I not? Are they my last choice or first choice, right? So that kind of a reputation builds pretty quickly. So if you fail too often, your current revenue is gone, your future revenue is at serious risk. The third point is, it comes down to cost, right? So if you are a charge point operator, you've got an network, your network has got to be big for people to like you and come to you repeatedly. But if you have a big network, then by design, these are all unmanned, these are all remotely managed and operated, which means in most cases, they have small hubs of people and repair and maintenance personnel. The moment you are located at point A, whereas a charger in point B, which is 600 kilometers away, fails, you're not going to be able to go and address it instantly, right? There is going to be a bit of a lead time to get to that. So that failure then extends. So your loss of revenue extends over a larger period of time. And then you got to send somebody, they spend quite a lot of time traveling all the way. They spend an entire day fixing one single charger. Your costs are high as well. Now, if we spin it on its head and say, we'll give you an alert before a failure is about to happen based on all these various metrics we referenced and analyzed from the past, which means you're then able to prevent customer impact, right? So when customers come to site, even if the asset is operating in a suboptimal kind of condition, it's still fine because it's still working, it's still delivering power. So the customer is happy because he or she is getting the electricity they wanted to buy from the site. But the charge point operator also has advance notice to say, hey, if you're not cashed in the next few weeks, this is about to go kaput. So you better plan something, right? And then what they can do is to say, well, I have somebody traveling there for an installation, for another routine inspection in 3 weeks from now anyway. So while they're going there, I'll also get them to dip in and do this, right? So all of a sudden, instead of someone spending an entire day going there to do something, you then bring it down to about 30 minutes to an hour. Now, these kind of calculations make a lot more sense overseas because the cost of labor is much higher in Europe and elsewhere. But equally, from a customer experience perspective, I think all CPOs, even in India, have the responsibility of giving as high a network uptime as possible. So you can give end users a confidence to buy more EVs and drive them intercity more often and so on, right? So that's really where it comes from for us. So prevent leakage of revenue for today and tomorrow, as well as reduce your cost of interventions. So your revenues are protected and your costs are brought down, which is win-win from both sides.
So actually something that I was wondering was, as a startup, how did you come up with so many software gigs? Like, how did you manage to have so much software brain? Like, how did you attract talent? Because as a startup, people are not very confident joining. So how did you manage that?
Oh, I sometimes ask myself that. So it hasn't been